Welcome back to another episode of the Westward Podcast. I'm your host, Devin Conley, and as always, so glad you're here. Thank you for tuning in. It means the world. I hope you're having a great day or a great weekend or a great year if you're listening to this way down the road, whatever it might be. Just really glad that you're here. Thanks for joining me. On this podcast, the Westward Podcast, we kind of just explore the spirit, the history, the wisdom of the American West, and I'll talk to folks that are deeply immersed in the Western industries, that have been, that want to be, and again, when I talk about the West, it doesn't have to be the physical West. We're going to chat with guests from back east, up north, down south. It's more just the spirit of the West that we're kind of exploring, whether that's horses and cattle, raising sheep, raising kids, raising some hell, whatever it might be, just do it wisely. We're just heading westward, and I'm really glad that you're heading westward with me. On today's episode, I want to talk about money and the economics of horse ownership. And I know some of you just laughed out loud at that. I can feel it. I can feel you laughing through the screen because you're going, Devin, there are no economics of horse ownership. What are you talking about? There's an old adage, old saying that I know can go for a variety of different industries or disciplines or whatever it might be. That's like, how do you make a small fortune in ranching? How do you make a small fortune with horses? You start with a big fortune. Okay, yeah, we've all heard that one. I love it. It cracks me up. And also, there's definitely some truth there. And I guess that's how adages, take root, is because they are grounded in truth often. So again, money is kind of one of those taboo topics, right? Like, I get it. Folks don't really want to talk about it. They don't want to discuss it. And I was certainly raised in a society and a culture and a time period where it was very rude to discuss money and very rude to have those conversations with people that weren't your immediate family. And so I totally get that. And I'm not here to tell you how to spend your money. I am not here today to give you a deep dive into my personal finances. That'd be real weird. No, I just want to talk about the economics of horse ownership because I love history. I was a history teacher, and I just think that it's a fascinating topic to discuss because, jokes aside, if you're going to own horses, if you are going to own livestock, if you want to own land, if you want to ranch, if you want to farm, whatever it might be, you got to get your finances in order. It's just one of those things that you're going to have some spreadsheets, and you're going to have some budgets, and you're going to have to look at your year in advance as you go forward as a horse owner or livestock owner to make sure that you can feed these animals throughout the entire year. These are all things that you have to consider. Now, of course, you have to consider all those things in daily life. If you have children, you better figure out, how you're going to feed your children. But with livestock, it's kind of an interesting thing because just like with other aspects of life, there are so many unforeseeable events that can happen. Vet visits, costs like your rig breaking down, all these things that add up really quickly that you kind of have to budget for. Oh, in today's episode, I'm just going to go a little bit through kind of the history of equine economics and what my personal thoughts are about looking at the finance aspect around horse ownership, about building a budget, about knowing when you're ready to take on the expense of owning a horse or another horse or another horse or another horse or another horse, because, you can't just have one, and all these things. Now, as always, these are my personal anecdotes and personal experiences. I do not have a degree in economics, but it is something that, I think is important to discuss, especially for first-time horse owners. If you're listening right now and you don't own horses yet, and you're kind of wondering about the cost aspect of it, maybe you can glean some information from this. And again, from my personal experiences and those of the wise and incredible folks around me, I do get a lot of questions often from people that, although many of us were raised to not talk about money because it was rude, I get some very pointed DMs sometimes that are like, how do you afford this? I need to know what you do for work right now and how much money you have saved up to afford to have horses. Which, I applaud the forthcoming nature of these folks' ability to ask questions. Sometimes it takes me a little, off guard, rocks me back on my heels a little bit, but I will kind of touch on what I do to make sure that I'm budgeted out for the year when I know I'm in the position to buy another horse things of that nature. So historically speaking, it's really interesting because owning a horse in the past was not a luxury. It was kind of a necessity. And they were an expense that you just had to take on if you wanted to travel, if you wanted to farm, if you needed to pull a plow, horses, mules, whatever it might be. Towns were even built with the thought in mind of how long it would take to travel from town to town by horse. Long before even trains connected the country, long before the automobile connected the country, it was horseback, it was wagon-drawn adventures. And so these planners literally had to look at, are our towns accessible on horseback to other areas for trade and other economic reasons? And during that time period where the horse was the main form of travel, where they were integral to the development of the country, to, expansion, to all these things, entire industries existed just around the horse, which, yeah, of course we still have today, absolutely. But so many of those industries were so specific to horse care. And I'm talking, your blacksmiths, your livery stables, your forges, your feed suppliers, all these things, that the entire industry was written on the back of a horse, just like human history was, right? And I don't know about you, but I grew up reading old Westerns. I loved Louis L'Amour. We own his entire collection, and I've read every single one of them multiple times. So if you've ever read an old Western, watched an old Western movie, or just know anything about the Old West and horseback travel, if your horse got injured, sick, died on you, whatever it might be, you were in big trouble, right? You pretty much had to have a horse to, if you were traveling, to get to where you needed to go. Because walking through the West in this untamed time with the elements, with nature, with the heat, the snow, whatever it might be, could be a death sentence very quickly if something happened to your horse. So not only do we have like this entire economy built on the back of a horse and the ability to travel where you need to go on the back of a horse, but livelihoods, so many livelihoods were tied directly to the ownership of these animals. And at this time, the horse was very much a capital investment. They were an investment that, they needed to earn their keep too. And they were a partner. They were a piece of equipment, right, on a lot of farms and ranches. And they were just so key to, like so many other things, the development of human history. And so much of the economy was built around the horse and horse travel. And of course, there's still plenty of industries today, that are based solely around the horse trainers, the horse show industry, the rodeo industry, trailer manufacturers, large animal veterinarians, hauling services, hay services. There's plenty of things outside ranching and cowboying that circle the horse itself. And that's really, really cool if you think about it, that there are still so many industries today, just as there were so many industries hundreds of years ago, that rely on the horse. I mean, you want to talk about the horse carrying the human on its back, metaphorically, literally, all of these things. That's still very relevant in today's world. And I mean, the economic impact of the equine industry is very noteworthy, just in the actual national economy. I think the American Horse Council, their most recent study showed that there's $177 billion worth of economic impact because of the horse, whether that's through actual industries around equines or whether that's tourism, veterinary services, whatever it is. Like 2.2 million jobs exist because of horses. And that's incredible. That is so amazing that this one animal can generate billions of dollars worth of revenue for the economy, millions of jobs for the people of this country, and has just played such a pivotal role in our economy from 300 years ago to today. And those industries, those positions range from things that are directly related to the horse industry, like horse breeders or trainers, to sectors that are kind of outside of the horse industry but can still be impacted, like police officers that have mounted police officer units. And even though the population of horses in this country has actually slightly decreased since the last study that I think was in 2017, the economic impact of horses continues to grow. And, the state of the economy definitely plays a role in folks deciding whether to have horses, keep horses, get more horses. Absolutely. Like the 2008 recession, I know that horse rescues were like maxed out in the amount of horses they could take. I do know the amount of horses surrendered skyrocketed, horses going to sales increased substantially. I know that the price of horses dropped, the horse market. I mean, at the time, obviously, I've never gone a day without horses in my life. And so I've always kind of been in tune with the horse market and the economy. I know that the horse market, the bottom fell out from it. And it was just a really tough time. And folks that maybe they weren't firmly cemented in the horse industry, whether it was like cowboys, ranchers, breeders, trainers, people that were showing, folks like that, maybe they just had horses because they love them, because they want one stand out their back door. A lot of people were faced with a really hard choice of, if they lost their job, how do they feed their family and how do they feed these horses? And that's just a very tragic decision for people to make when the economy suffers. Is pets and horses, there are a lot of studies that show are kind of some of the first expenses cut, where they have to surrender them or sell them because they just can't afford to care for them to the level they want to anymore. And that's tragic. That's very, very hard. And my heart goes out to anybody that's ever had to make those decisions. And trust me, in my own personal life, when, again, I have not ever been wealthy, there's been points in my life where it's been like, okay, I can't afford multiple horses anymore. I either need to cut back or I need to figure out how many I can afford on the budget I have. Where can I cut costs on my own personal expenses so that I can maintain, having horses in my life? I've definitely been faced with those decisions. I have been a broke, struggling college student, working a night job and a job on the weekends to put myself through school. I have been a very down on my luck public school teacher trying to afford rent at the time in northern Colorado, which is wildly expensive, while also, taking care of my horses, trying to budget for my own personal expenses. Just a little side note on that. For me, it comes down to, where am I willing to cut costs in other aspects of my life so that I can afford my horses? And a big piece of that for me is I have never, I've never owned a new vehicle in my entire life. In fact, the pickup I drive now is a 2015. It's got 206,000 miles on it. It is by far and away the newest vehicle I've ever driven in my life. Most of the pickups I've had, owned before were not even in the same decade, the same millennium. A lot of them were 90s, 80s pickups. And that's for me. It doesn't bother me. It doesn't bother me to drive older vehicles so that I can afford horses, so I can afford a new saddle when I need it, so I can afford the supplements, the feed, all of those things. That's just a personal decision I make. Another thing that for me is kind of something that I factor into my finances is that I have no qualms about pulling an older trailer that isn't from this decade, this millennium, whatever it might be. My trailer right now is a 1991 trailer. It's older than I am, and it's got some surface rust, but it's safe, and I checked the floorboards, and it's in good condition, and I keep the bearings packed, and I keep the brakes tuned up on it, and it's a good little trailer. It is not fancy, right? And that's another thing that I think is really important to note, is that your lifestyle with horses is going to fluctuate with your income, with your age, with your situation, your circumstances. All of those things can definitely impact what your life with horses looks like. And I didn't really mean to get off on this tear, but I'm gonna continue down this path for a minute if you don't mind coming with me. When I was living at home as a teenager, as a young adult with my family, and my father was taking us down the road to rodeos, and I'm talking long before I was 18, I said this in my first episode, we had like a 1980 Jamboree motorhome and like a rusted out little bumper pull Charmac horse trailer. That's what we went down the road with. So we had horses. My dad owned his business at this time. He was kind of struggling to get his feet under him, but he did budget things to where we could have the horses and we can go down the road, but we didn't take vacations and we didn't drive nice vehicles. And same thing with my father. He didn't drive new pickups or anything like that. He gets one pair, even to this day, he gets one new pair of jeans a year. Now I buy them for him at Christmas. That's one of his Christmas gifts that he just has learned to count on. But I mean, that man Like, my mother was stitching patches over his shirts, over his jeans to make them last. We did not have new vehicles. We had one vehicle for the family for most of my childhood. And then he bought my mom a car as his business kind of started to take off a little bit. And that was like a huge deal. And then, as things progressed and like he picked up more work and things of that nature, we upgraded our rig a little bit. And I will never forget when we bought the diesel pickup. It was a gray Ford 2001. It was one of the last years they ever made the 7.3 engine. And we bought that thing new. And it was like the first new vehicle that my dad had ever owned, that any of us had ever even been in. And it was like, wow, we are living now. And then Dad had been kind of squirreling money away for years and years and years. And we ended up finally getting a 4-horse, gooseneck, living quarters trailer. Again, pivotal moment in my life, because it felt like we had finally kind of crested this mountain of struggle a little bit, and all of a sudden we were doing the dang thing and pulling into the fairgrounds with our new rig, which I also want to preface this and say the living quarters horse trailer that we had an 8-foot short wall. So it was very small living quarters, still living quarters nonetheless, which was incredible, but still very small, compared to a lot of big rigs going down the road. But man, we pulled into the fairgrounds and I just thought, like, we're doing it. We have really arrived. And it felt like a game changer. Now I'll never forget how I felt when we had this living quarters trailer, when we had this, diesel pickup, and we could make it to events like 3 hours sooner than before because we weren't in a motorhome that tapped out at 55 miles an hour. And it just felt like we were finally really in the game. And that's just one small example of how we skimped and we saved and we just made do until, as a family, my dad was able to kind of upgrade us a little bit. But at the point in my life where I'm at now, I don't own a living quarters horse trailer. I don't have a brand new crew cab diesel pickup. Like, there's no way. Like, I just told you my situation. That's not what I have, and that's not what I can afford. And that's not what I'm looking for either at this point in time, because those are things I'm willing to get by with the best that I can and make sure I maintain my equipment, make sure that everything's running strong. My fiance is wonderful about keeping all my, my vehicles up and running and changing the oil and making sure that I'm safe going down the road and all that. But also just knowing that that's an area that changed for me because of the change in circumstances, the change in age. When we quit rodeoing at 18 in junior rodeo, and then we kind of started moving into college rodeo and some amateur rodeo and beyond, my sister moved away. My dad took that living quarters horse trailer and he sold it, and he gave my sister and I both a little startup money to buy our own first trailer, which was a huge blessing, and it was a gift for sure. And I ended up with just like a little 3-horse gooseneck, no living quarter. Like, again, this was like a 1996 trailer, but I loved it. It was like, oh, this is mine. And it was definitely a step down from a living quarters, but it was mine. And it was such a blessing. And it was such a gift. And then I kind of fell on some hard times. I broke my back. I had some very significant medical bills. I will talk about all that later. That is a long story for another time. And I had to downsize even more. And so that's kind of how I ended up with the, pickup and trailer I have now. Is I downsized another step because I needed to cut back on expenses. I needed to pay for some medical bills. I didn't really want to sell horses. And so just making sure I had a safe rig to take them down the road in, but that was smaller, that was older, that didn't have the eye appeal, whatever it was, that became my priority. And again, these are just my personal anecdotes of things that I have no problem driving an old pickup. I have no problem pulling up somewhere with kind of a small, old bumper pull horse trailer. I've been in this game my entire life. I'm not in this game for aesthetics. And I'm not in this game to impress people, right? I used to be when I was younger and more vain. And now I'm in it for the love of the horse, for the love of the sport, for the love of the Western lifestyle, the ranching industry, agriculture, all that. I went off on a little bit of a tangent there, but I think it's all related to what I'm talking about the economics of owning horses, in that there are going to be times in your life where you you got to make hard choices. God willing, maybe there aren't, but a lot of times there's going to be times in your life where you got to decide, okay, am I going to downsize my rig? Am I going to downsize my herd? What am I going to do? Where am I going to cut back? Okay, so I'm not getting a new vehicle this year or whatever it is. Make sure you're safe. Make sure you're taken care of going down the road. But that's just part of it. That's just part of the life, is knowing where you're willing to cut costs a little bit to afford your horses, to afford your livestock, to afford, the Western lifestyle. And that's what it is for me. I also don't have, anything designer, anything like expensive in terms of clothes or things of that nature. I have, as I've gotten older, gotten very much, as I've gotten older, I've become much more inclined to spend a little bit of money up front to get the higher quality thing that I'm going to use all the time and have one of it instead of 10 of the cheaper things, to have more of them, but they don't last as long. So that goes for tack, that goes for my boots, that goes for like my hat, things like that. I'm willing to spend a little more money up front for higher quality things of that nature that I know are going to last me than spend less money for more of them, which is going to cost me more money in the long term because I'm constantly replacing them as they wear out. So I've gotten better about that as I get a little bit older, and my fiance has definitely taught me that with tack. And you just look at that and budget for it however you can. Do whatever you need to do to make sure that you are fulfilling the areas that you're really passionate about making sure you fulfill, and where you can cut costs in other places to do that. And so that's kind of what I do, so that I can afford the horses, so that I can afford to buy, it's a used tack, but it's tack that, like a cactus saddle. I really like a cactus saddle. They run a little bit more. I think they're incredibly high quality though. And so I'm willing to drive the old pickup. I'm willing to wear out the jeans and patch them if I need to. I'm more than willing to shop at the thrift store, for my button ups. I am more than willing to not have a lot of a lot so that I can buy that saddle, so that I can afford those horses, so I can feed them the top quality hay that, the best quality hay that I can find, because that's what I have to do to keep things working with the budget that we have. Which kind of leads me to another part of talking about horse economics, is for those that are just getting into horses, you're just becoming a horse owner, maybe you're coming back to it after a long time. I've heard this said so many times. I've said this to so many people. The cheapest part of owning a horse is the purchase price. Hands down. That's going to be the cheapest thing about them. And I know for a lot of folks, they're like, well, but the horse I want is insert amount here, $7,000, $8,000, whatever. How is that the cheapest part? Because feed is expensive, because vet bills are expensive, because making sure that you maintain your horse with consistent farrier work, dental work, everything they need to stay at the top of their game, to stay healthy, keep them going down the road, maintain your rig, all of these things, tack, everything, it adds up and it's expensive. And a horse emergency, just like a human medical emergency, man, that can just knock you flat back on your heels if you're not prepared for it. And it can happen in an instant. I make a lot of funny videos about horses hurting themselves in the dumbest of ways. It's all based on truth. It's all real. And anybody that's been in the horse game for, a while knows that it's all rooted in truth. So understand that buying the horse is the cheapest part, because that's a one-time expense. That's going to be just about the only one-time expense you have when you own horses. Everything else is going to be a recurring expense. Feed, you got to budget for that. I like to budget for the year. So I like to figure out how much feed, how much hay I'm going to need to buy for the entire year. And then I try to set aside, before I have to buy it, that big chunk of money, and I don't touch it. So I am very blessed in that I have a spot to keep a lot of hay stored up, so I can buy a year's worth at a time. There's a lot of people that can graze for half of the year. They don't have to buy hay. It's just dependent on your situation, right? But that's just one example of looking ahead and knowing that's going to be a recurring expense, and that's a big expense. Buying hay is expensive. Good hay is worth it though, right? And it's not cheap, side note, for your hay producer to produce nice hay for you either. So it's not just the money they have into the ground and the fertilizer and, all of those things. It's the money they have into the equipment that it takes to harvest that hay, bale it, transport it, and then store it. that also adds up. So, good hay costs money, but it's worth it. And that's just one example of a recurring expense. Your farrier I'm not going to give you an exact time frame because people get really finicky over this, but your farrier, when your horse is due, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever that is, that's a recurring expense. You're always going to have that expense when you own horses. Your vet bills can be anything from a couple $100, to get teeth floated, to you just racked up $2,000 on an emergency call on a Sunday because your horse has a wire cut that needs immediate attention and stitching, right? It's just kind of a guessing game when it comes to vet bills, which is why I like to make sure I have a separate account for my horses where I keep money stored just for feed, just for farrier stuff, just for vet bills. And I don't touch that account unless it's for the horses. Now, if I go to the tack store, I really need, one of those horses chewed on a pair of reins. I really got to replace that pair of reins. I'll pull money out of that account and use it because it's for the horses. But I actually do like to have a separate account entirely just for horse expenses. Right now, I'm just kind of talking to the first-time horse owner, the person who really wants to get their first horse or come back to the lifestyle or whatever it is. If you've been in the horse game, you've owned horses your whole life, you're a horse trainer, you're a breeder, you're a cowboy, whatever it is, you know all this, right? And so this is kind of just for my friend on the other side of the screen that's just getting into horses. Just be prepared. Just know that the purchase price is pretty much the only one-time cost you're going to pour into a horse. Everything else is going to be a recurring cost. And I cannot stress this enough. Put aside money for an emergency because unfortunately, it's not if it happens, it is when it happens and how bad. That's the saying that my dad kind of raised us on in terms of horses getting hurt and us getting hurt when we were dealing with horses. It's not if it happens, it's when and how bad. So something to think about there for my first-time horse owners. And I think it is also really important when we're talking about the economics of owning horses is to track your expenses, because a lot of time we underestimate how much we're actually spending on things, which throws our budget off. So track those expenses. Track exactly how much you're spending on supplements or, feed or whatever it is, just so that you can be prepared to continue that. You find something that works for your horse. I feed Buckeye Nutrition. I love it. It works for my horses. I'm going to keep them on it. So I need to make sure I budget for that. I feed alfalfa. Don't come for me. I know there's a lot of opinions on feeding alfalfa. I really like alfalfa. I have my reasons for feeding it, and it works for my herd. Okay, so you got to figure out what works for your herd. Don't just, take my advice. Work with a nutritionist or a vet or somebody to figure that out. But I like alfalfa. I like Buckeye Nutrition. I got a budget to make sure I can keep my horses on that because I know that they do really well with it. Another thing that kind of plays into this whole economics of owning horses is, okay, I'm going to say this, and this is a hypocritical statement because I've absolutely done this in the past. Try not to impulse buy a horse off emotion. Okay, it's out there. I've said it. Now I'm going to tell you point blank, I am so guilty of this in the past, especially when I was younger. Oh my goodness. I'd go look at a horse, ride it for 15 minutes, seen it all of 30 minutes, and I'd be like, all right, let's talk price, and get the brand inspection, come back, pick it up a day later, and take it home. And sometimes it worked out. And you know what? Sometimes it didn't, because I bought on emotion more times than I'd like to admit. But I did, especially when I was younger. I don't really do that anymore. Now I'm a little more calculated. I take time to think things over. I make sure I've gone through my budget and make sure I have the funds, not just for the purchase price of the horse, but do I have the funds to feed this horse? Do I have the funds to care for this horse with vet bills? Do I have the funds to buy new tack for it? What if the saddle that I have doesn't fit it and I got to fit it with a new saddle or whatever? Do I have all these funds? I think that through now much more clearly, and I've gotten a lot better where I don't just buy based on emotion. But you show up to this owner's property and there's that horse standing there. You've seen the pictures online. You've talked to the owner on the phone, and there he is. Maybe he's just like this beautiful horse, what you've always imagined. You ride him. He seems great. You're like, this is it. Let's buy him. That can work out really well. Again, I've done it, and it has absolutely worked out. But if you haven't gone through your budget and made sure you're in the right position, again, I'm going to stress this, not just to buy the horse, but to care for the horse. for however many years it either has left with you or on this earth, then you're buying on emotion and you're buying out of impulse. And that is a dangerous game because a horse is a huge investment, right? You get it home and it's not like you can just be like, well, I'm not going to feed it today because I don't have the money for more hay. No, obviously you can't do that with anything, any living creature. This isn't a pet rock that you can set down and come back to in 10 days and it's still going to be there. Like, this is a huge investment. I know, that's basic common sense. But again, speaking from experience, it's so easy to buy on impulse and emotion. Just make sure you're prepared to add another one to your herd or to get your first one. I haven't even gone into the logistics of making sure that your property is set up for a horse. If you don't own horses yet, fencing, shelter, water. Do you live in a cold climate? Is your water going to freeze? Do you have electricity run to your barn? All of these things. Like, this could be a whole episode in and of itself to talk about how to set your property up for horses. All things that are going to cost money. So again, the purchase price is the cheapest part. Everything else is going to be a lot more, and it's going to be recurring expenses. We've kind of ran this gamut a little bit of talking about horses and the economy all the way back to the Old West days where the economy kind of functioned because of the horse. Towns were built based on how long it took to ride a horse from town to town, where there were these huge industries solely dedicated to the horse and its impact on the economy, right? All the way up to their impact on today's economy with $177 billion brought into the economy because of the horse, whether that's in direct impact or in some roundabout way, all the way to budgeting for your first horse or adding more horses to your herd. My personal opinions on how I afford my horses. Again, I kind of wanted to talk about this because I do get a lot of comments from folks that they think I've got a lot of money. And I know money's just one of those weird things to even mention, but it's not that I have a lot of money and that's why I own horses. And that is also the experience of everybody in my circle. It's that we know where we're willing to cut costs and where we're willing to sacrifice a little bit so that we can have horses. Unfortunately, if you're your average horse owner, you don't really get to have it all, right? And sometimes you see that. Sometimes you see the brand new massive rigs with the very expensive horses. And I know sometimes you might wonder to yourself how they're doing it. One, I don't want to sound bad here. That's their business, right? And that's up to them to decide. There's a lot of people with very, very good paying jobs. There's a lot of people that they just have the infrastructure for it. There's a lot of people that have skimped and saved in the past to be able to have what they have now. And there's a lot of people that finance things because they're comfortable doing that. So do not compare your journey, your financial journey with horses, to anybody else's because you do not know their situation, nor do you need to, because that's their business. They're living their life. You go live yours, right? I'm just trying to share a little bit about the financial aspect of owning horses, give you a little insight into how I make it work. I drive old pickups. I pull old trailers. I make sure they're safe, but I pull old trailers. I buy my clothes secondhand most of the time. Most of my furniture is secondhand. I don't own shiny, expensive gadgets, all these things. Not a problem if you do. Also, let me make that clear. If you do you, if that's your thing, go for it. It's just, that's where I'm willing to cut costs so I can have the horses. And I've always said, you got to spend your money on something, right? And I think that looks different for everybody. There's car people. There's people that like to spend money on cars and they want that new car. And that is so cool. Like, if that's your passion, oh my gosh, go on with your bad self. There's dog people that they invest in their dogs. There's people that really, they are, fashionistas. They invest in their clothes. Everybody has their thing that they're spending their money on and they're willing to cut costs somewhere else. If you were talking to somebody that was really into designer wear and fashion, they're not going to say, oh yeah, well, I'm willing to give that up so that I can buy a horse if they're not interested in horses. If they're interested in horses, maybe they are willing to give it up. But if they're not going to be like, well, why would I do that? I don't want a horse. And that's kind of where I'm at. I don't mind not having new stuff because I just don't really care about it personally. I'd rather have the the horses. And like I said, I do budget. My fiance has really helped me with this. Like, I do budget to make sure I can afford the good quality things that I'm going to be using all the time that will save me money in the long run, because I can buy one of the really good quality thing instead of 10 of the lesser quality thing that's going to wear out way faster. So just a little, again, small little anecdote there of things that I am willing to spend the good money on are the good saddles, the boots for myself. My dad always said try to put something of high quality between yourself and the ground, right? So I'll spend the money on the good boots. I'll spend the money on the hat because I'm going to wear the heck out of it. And it's kind of like a little bit of your character, right? What your hat looks like and your personal choices around your hat. I'll spend the money on tack for my horse, well-balanced bits so that I know he's comfortable. I'll spend the money on really high-quality hay, obviously, high-quality feed, like Buckeye Nutrition. I'll spend the money on things of this nature because I know they're going to last me, and I know that they're important to the longevity of myself, my rig, my horse, whatever it might be. I keep my pickup and my trailer well-maintained, keep good tires on them. You know, again, my fiance is really good about keeping me going down the road safely. We do all the maintenance on everything. But when it comes to aesthetics, they're not shiny and flashy. You're not going to pull into a place and people are going to be like, wow, look at that rig, you know? And that's fine. That's fine with me too. I've also always believed it's not what you pull in with, it's what you unload out of the back. And I guess that's another thing that I will spend my money on are good quality horses. So I guess what this kind of boils down to leave you with some closing thoughts, is that you have to balance your passion with pragmatism. And you have to be realistic in what you're going to do. I would love to have an indoor arena with 30 box stalls filled with the horses that are bred the way I like them bred, the horses that look the way I like them to look, you know, the cow horses, like short-backed, catty little suckers. I would love that. You think I wouldn't love that? Of course I would. I would love to be able to just have all the money to make that happen, but I don't. And so I don't live in that world. And I think that's also another big thing is you got to live within your means. And I would love to have, I do horse shop online. I window shop. I don't message buyers because I'm not ready to buy, and don't be a tire kicker. That's kind of annoying, but I love reading horse for sale ads. I'm not in the position to buy another horse right now at this second, although that is something that we're looking at here in the near future as Wilson kind of gets a little bit older, but we're budgeting for it. We have a horse budget, we're adding to it, and then when we end up getting one, if we spend less than what we have in the budget, great. It goes back into the horse fund to take care of everything. If we spend more, well, we're not ready to spend more. We have to keep saving. So just a side note on that. But you have to be pragmatic even with your passions. So that is one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is that some of life's greatest values can't be calculated on a spreadsheet. I've heard people say, oh, the money I would have if I didn't own horses. And it's like, yeah, I feel you. I get you. How much joy would you have, though? Because joy can't be balanced in a checkbook. Joy can't be balanced on a spreadsheet. And if horses bring you joy, like they do for me and so many other people, that's not really something that you can put down in terms of a number. But if they add value to your life, and if you can budget for them and plan for them and just work around owning horses by cutting costs elsewhere where you're not as concerned, that's what matters. Horses have always played a big role in our economy as a country, and I think they will continue to because there are so many industries built around the horse. And I think that's a really, really cool thing. So whether you're fully immersed in the horse world and that's your full-time job, you're a trainer or breeder, you show whatever, you're a competitor, or you just have a horse standing out your back door that you like to go out and pet on and ride down the road when you have time, whatever it is, everybody that owns horses has to budget for them, and we all know this. Because if you don't budget for them, if you just spend money willy-nilly, buying horses on impulse, on emotion, you don't budget for your hay, you don't have an emergency fund set aside, it can be catastrophic, and it can lead you to make some really hard choices about downsizing, cutting back, having to sell horses, whatever it might be. And again, sometimes that just happens because of life circumstances, and if that's ever happened to you, Like it happened to me where I had to sell my trailer, downsize to a smaller trailer. I feel you. I get it. It's really hard. You just got to do the best you can. Try to plan ahead. Try to have the budget. Know that the the horse industry is stubbornly irrational and likes to change very, very quickly. And just, again, do the best you can with what you have. And if I can leave you with just another small little piece of advice that I have learned, again, I really like to keep my finances separate. I like to have the horse fund. I have a horse buying fund. Like I mentioned, we're looking at, potentially getting a horse here sometime this year, adding a new one to the herd. So we have the fund to buy it. And then I also have the horse care fund that I set aside. If I can leave you a little more advice in terms of that, in that arena, pun intended, don't spend your hay money on clothes for yourself, and don't spend your retirement money on vet bills if you can avoid it. It's really a good idea, in my opinion, as not a financial advisor, just a horse owner who's learned a lot of hard lessons over my 32 years, to have your finances separate so that you can make sure you know where your money is going. Because your horse habit will take over your finances if you let it. So, plan ahead, budget, know where your money's going, spend the money on the good things that are going to last you. And again, remember, we can be as pragmatic as possible. But joy, happiness, fulfillment, and satisfaction that comes from owning horses, livestock, living this life can't really be calculated on a balance sheet. So just do the best you can. And just the reminder that anything I talk about on this show is anecdotal. It's my experiences. I am not an expert financial advisor. This is not expert advice. These are just musings from me who has lived this lifestyle my entire life, who's never gone a day without owning horses, who has fallen flat on my face and made big mistakes, which I'll do a whole episode on, you learning from my mistakes, like steal my experience kind of thing. I will do that. And just learning things the hard way a lot of the time, while also surrounding myself with people that are very wise and very keyed in to how things work within these industries, and passing some of that advice that I've learned along the way onto you. So again, my personal experiences, this is not medical advice. I am not a professional financial advisor. I am just a gal that has lived the life my entire existence and has, stumbled and fallen and learned and picked myself back up and succeeded and grown and matured. And I just want to pass on some of those lessons to you. Again, thank you for being here on the Westward Podcast with me. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I would absolutely love if you reach out with your comments or your questions or any stories that you have about horse life, from the funny to the frustrating to the upsetting to the, oh my gosh, I can't believe he did that, stories about your horses. Just your general feedback, guests that you want to see on the show, anything like that. I would really love to hear from you. You can email the Westward Podcast at gmail.com, and I promise I will read them. And it would help me so much if you give us a review on the show, or if you click that little follow button so that we can kind of build our audience base a little bit. Subscribe to the show. You can subscribe to the YouTube. All this will be linked in the show notes. Check out the LiveEQ app. It's free to check out, and there's so many cool horses for sale on there. So again, you can do your window shopping if you're not, in the spot to buy a horse, but you like to keep your thumb on the pulse of the horse market. You can check out the LiveEQ app and just give us some feedback. Give us a follow if you would. And I'm just really, really grateful for all of you on the other side of that screen listening right now. So don't forget, check your cinch, check on your friends. God is good. I'm so glad you're here. And thanks for heading westward with me.